From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Coming up today, K-State's Sarah Lancaster and Terry Griffin will talk about their new analysis of how one farmer's weed management approach might affect that of a neighboring farmer and vice versa, accounting for herbicide technology adoption, herbicide stewardship, and other variables. It's interesting work, and they'll tell us about it. Then on the latest edition of FSA Coffee Talk from the Farm Service Agency, Todd Barrows has the latest news on USDA farm program implementation here in Kansas. And on this week's Wildlife Management segment, K-State's Charlie Lee will take a look at a new study of weather changes and their impact on prairie chicken nesting success. All that and more next on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others, and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Thanks for tuning in once again for another Agriculture Today on this, the K-State Radio Network. For openers today, we'll look at a new analysis that was put together by our two guests here, and it's rather unique to say the least. It's looking at weed management decisions made more or less on a neighborhood scale and how one farmer's actions in herbicide usage might affect another. Now, that's something you would think naturally would be hard to get at, but what they've come up with here today does lend some concrete thought to that. Joining us now is Sarah Lancaster, Weed Management Specialist, K-State Research and Extension, along with Precision Agricultural Economist at K-State, Terry Griffin. So, Sarah, set the table further here, if you would. What led you and Terry to go about this particular effort?
Well, Eric, as you know, dicamba has been a pretty hot topic for the last few years. And, I've spent a lot of time thinking about it and how it impacts different farmers differently and how every farmer is sort of making their own decisions, right? And so with all the events this summer, with the legal action, I really had some questions about what is 2021 going to look like in terms of farmers' decisions around the herbicide-resistant technology they're using in their soybeans. And so I thought it was probably something that their decision-making was budget-driven. And so I reached out to a couple of the ag economists and started asking some questions. And we kind of kicked it around a little bit and looked at different theories that might explain what's going on. And just a few weeks ago, we kind of settled in on using this method that we wrote about here.
And by the way, this write-up is on the agmanager.info website. We'd certainly, as we go along, encourage you to look at what they put together in print here. Terry, this is a rather nebulous thing to get at, how producers make their decisions with regard or without regard to what their neighbors are doing, which is the essence of this drift concern.
There's a lot of farm management decisions that we face that have to be made with some level of risk being a part of it, uncertainty, and this is certainly part of that case. And I was listening to some of the anecdotal stories that Sarah was sharing, plus there's a lot of Twitter activity around dicamba. And I was looking at these comments and listening to Sarah, another weed scientist, and I was thinking, this is what economists may refer to as a game theory issue. And after a few conversations, I'm like, well, why don't we just, explicitly write this up with that methodology that will show that some of these decisions that may not seem rational on the surface are, in fact, rational in their stable form. And so we employed some methodologies that I've never used before. And there was a recent movie from 2001, which is 20 years ago now.
Not that recent.
No.
It's a retro movie. So a lot of our listeners may be familiar with Russell Crowe and Jennifer Connelly were in A Beautiful Mind. Russell Crowe is portraying John Nash, who was a person who was given a Nobel for coming up with this methodology.
As we talk about this, we don't want to get too deeply into how this works, but there are certain variables that you consider, and then you put those into certain scenarios. Is that what you and Terry came up with here, Sarah?
Right. So we thought about all of the different, well, not all, but we thought about some of the different situations in which producers might be trying to make these decisions. Specifically, again, with regard to what type of soybeans they're going to plant. Are they going to plant dicamba-resistant soybeans? Or are they going to plant some other variety? So we looked at a variety of scenarios that a producer might find themselves in when trying to make choices about the soybean varieties that they want to use. So we considered things like the potential for off-target movements and, financial or weed management implications. But we also tried to take into account some of the kind of intangible things that growers consider when they're making their choices. Sometimes growers may not even recognize that those intangible things are influencing their decisions, but they do, right? So things like getting along with their neighbors and other preferences they have for how they manage their operation.
The interesting part of this is that you're able, through this exercise, to get an idea of what will happen on the part of one farmer's situation if another producer goes a different direction in how they run their herbicide programs. You were able to capture that, Terry?
Yes, we were. So using the techniques from the movie we're talking about, it's called a Nash equilibrium. We're not looking for the greatest payoff for any individual player. That might be the assumption on the surface. But what we're looking for is a stable outcome when a player cannot do any better given what the other player is doing. In this case, so in our fact sheet, we talk about two farmers. We got Defensive Dan and a sprayer Sally. And Defensive Dan cannot do any better than he's doing right now given what Sprayer Sally is doing. And likewise, Sprayer Sally cannot do any better for herself given what Defensive Dan is doing. And that's a stable outcome. And the interesting thing is in business, economics, here farm management, these stable outcomes tend to be where businesses gravitate to naturally. So these decisions have already been internalized by Kansas farmers or farmers using the technology across the country. But it may not be obvious to outsiders looking in on how they made those decisions. And that's how Sarah and I decided to use this technique to evaluate what's the best options for each group of farmers, given what the other farmers are known or suspected to have chosen to do.
How do you see this as being then valuable in employment of various herbicide programs and the resistant technologies out there, Sarah?
One of the things that I'm starting to see, Eric, in terms of a survey that I did this summer and just interacting with various extension audiences here throughout the fall and winter, I think we're going to see more diversity in our soybean herbicide management systems in 2021. I have some concerns about how that might impact our county and district extension agents. I think this gives them a tool that they might be able to use to help them kind of sort through some of the things that they see going on in their communities as they try to be, leaders in the ag industry in their communities.
Now, there's depth to this exercise here. You mentioned technology adoption, the care in which an individual might apply their herbicides, depending on what party it is, as you compare them, regulatory forces that might come to bear, even compensation for off-target movement of a particular herbicide. You've tried to account for all of that here, have you not?
We did. We certainly were not all-encompassing in our scenarios, but we tried to come up with scenarios that we felt like would be representative of what might be going on out there in the community, and then B, that would give folks some ability to kind of compare some of the options for themselves and kind of figure out when some of those options might be exercised.
So, Terry, as one would pull up the article that you and Sarah have put together on Ag Manager and look at it, you believe that this is something that if they study it and perhaps plug in their own variables, that they can draw from this?
I do. These types of games are something I think will help people think through the process. It's a 9-page fact sheet. There are 5 large schematics that Sarah put together. We did write it in to try to make this as simple to read as possible.
Mm-hmm. One thing about the paper, Eric, is that, there's a lot of text, and then there's those large diagrams. So, if a person were kind of skimming and wanted to get the takeaway, we did pretty intentionally try to summarize what each of those diagrams are trying to say to try to drive the point home a little bit. Yeah. So we tried to take an academic topic and make it straightforward and applicable.
Very good. Practical.
Yeah.
Before the end of 2020, we did put it up on a website and use Twitter to announce it existed in 2020. That was important to us. And we did get some good questions, very thoughtful questions from some people out in a Twitterverse. And so we do know people have read this and had some pretty deep thoughts that they wanted to dig a little bit deeper.
One last thought here, Sarah. If nothing else, if a producer would have a glance at this and maybe prompt some thoughts and questions in that individual's mind, it might spur on a dialogue between neighbors on what they're doing, would it not?
Absolutely, Eric. As we've talked about the dicamba situation throughout my tenure here at K-State, one of the things that has been pretty prevalent for me is just making sure that, farmers are getting along in their neighborhoods and everyone is able to do, what they want. And so I think that that's an important aspect of this, Eric, that guys could use this just to kind of gain some insight maybe into what that crazy neighbor is thinking.
Well, the article is entitled Social Aspects of Weed Management Decisions, and it is now posted for your viewing, producers and others interested, on the agmanager.info website. Thanks to the both of you for coming over and telling us about it.
Thanks, Eric.
It's good to be here.
Along with us here, Sarah Lancaster, Weed Management Specialist, and Terry Griffin, Precision Agricultural Economist at Kansas State University. And we'll be back with more for you. After this, you're listening to Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Up next on Agriculture Today, the session we have every other Tuesday here on the broadcast, briefing you on what's happening with USDA program administration in the state of Kansas. From the Farm Service Agency, we call this the FSA Coffee Talk, and we brought by once more a program specialist with the State Farm Service Agency office, Todd Barrows, to fill us in. Todd, things active as always as the new year comes on at the FSA?
It continues to be a very busy season for us, Eric, and as we start the new calendar year, it seemed prudent that we would cover some important reminders on farm operating structure in order to ensure a smooth enrollment process as programs come up and payments are being processed during this calendar year. Doing a little bit of our homework and review now will save on time and frustration later on down the road.
Well, let's dwell on that very thing. What you're getting at here is good maintenance of those farm records as one goes about their FSA business, right?
Absolutely, Eric. As we start the new calendar year, producers need to make sure that their farm records are up to date for how they are conducting business today and how those farms are being operated. First of all, I want to talk about a little bit about farm structure. Has there been any land changes starting for the 2021 crop year? Meaning, have you added or lost any acres? Have you purchased or leased any new acres that you didn't farm in 2020? Review your farm structures to make sure land is properly constituted, meaning all similar operated and owned land is carried together in one unit by your administrative county. And I also want to remind, even though in talking about cropland in general, this is also good advice for those livestock producers out there, because we do have standing programs now for the livestock producer, and so they need to be looking at their grazing acres as well.
Something else that's aligned with that farm structure, the actual owner and operator status of same, right?
Yep. Are all farm ownership records correct and up to date? As producers work in estate planning and make changes in their operation, are those changes being shared with FSA and our farm records? A common finding that we see is individuals establish revocable trusts for estate planning purposes, but they continue to conduct business with FSA as individuals and don't relate to us that they formulated these trusts. In a year of death, FSA considers the eligible producer as the individual or entity that was on our farm records at the time of death. So if you have set up a trust for an estate planning purposes and have not added that trust to your FSA farm records, then the eligible producer is still the individual and not the trust for benefits in the program year in which the person or individual becomes deceased.
Well, that's a key detail to be sure is covered here. You bring up a term that's often used in FSA jargon, the entity involved in the program payments, whatever they might be, and that's yet another thing that needs to be fully clear, you say.
Yes. The third thing that we see that's commonly overlooked is your entity membership. We develop these entities. They have multiple memberships. Members change within the entities, and we fail to get past that information on to FSA. FSA attributes all payments back to a warm body or a Social Security tax identification number. So while a payment is made to the entity in most cases, payments are attributed to the members based on the ownership share. FSA uses the status date of June 1 in order to determine ownership of entities. So producers with entities need to let FSA know that membership changes may be caused by sale of ownership or by death prior to that June 1 date, so we're sure that payments are accredited to the right people.
Okay. And any actual physical changes to the layout of the operation, those should also be accounted for here?
Yeah, the fourth one I wanted to bring up, and the final one, is any type of cropland or boundary changes. It seems like in the fall or winter months, a lot of times we'll clean up a fence line, or producers will clean up a tree row or an abandoned farmstead. These types of changes need to also be reported to FSA because that affects the boundary or the acreages, and we need to correct those before payments are being issued. And just in general, Eric, I just wanted to say once more that making updates prior to program enrollment and payment issuing, it's much easier to correct those things at this time than try to correct them after payments have been issued.
So once again, assure that your farm records and all the data associated with your operation is up to date as you work with the FSA on programs in the coming months. And what is happening with those key programs at this point that you think producers should be aware of, Todd?
The first thing I wanted to talk about was, as you are aware of and the listeners are aware of across our state, there was just a slew of stand-up programs last year that FSA was dealing with, mainly CFAP 1 and 2, and then also the WIP Plus program, and there was others. And while those application periods have ended in order to enroll into those programs for benefits, FSA is still busy working through processing the final applications. With WIP Plus applications requested in a handful of counties are still being finalized. If you have not received a WIP Plus payment yet and were expecting one, just be patient a little longer. We are almost to the end and should be processing those payments shortly. When most applications have been processed nationally, at that time, then a decision will be made at a national level if an additional payment can be issued to applicable producers that enrolled in the WIP Plus program. If you remember back initially, producers received 50% of their calculated or expected benefits based on a set pool of money that was obligated for the WIP Plus program. Once all applications nationally are paid, then a decision can be made if funds are available for additional payment, and if funding is available, how much can be issued to those applicable producers. I also want to to bring up and just touch on CFAP 1 and the CFAP 2 program. Just throw out there as a reminder, those programs were stood up using producer certification of either production or sales amounts. So FSA has now started the process of spot checking a percentage of the producer's applications under these programs for accuracy. Notifications are being sent out by the different local field administrative offices to producers that were randomly selected to provide documents needed to support their prior application certifications, and we're working through that spot check process at this point.
So if a producer receives one of those notifications, you need a response fairly promptly.
That's correct. I believe we give them 2 weeks to respond with their documentation to support what they certified for benefits.
And to finish things off here, there is a handful of other deadlines coming up within the next several weeks that producers should be attuned to.
Yeah, in closing, I just wanted to throw out a couple more program reminders. These would not be applicable to every producer in the state, but those that are applicable to, they're very important. February 1st is the last day for producers to finalize their 2020 LFP or Livestock Forage Program application or an ELAP application, which is Emergency Livestock Programs, if they are applicable to your specific operation and situation. March 1st is the last day for producers to finalize their 2020 Livestock Indemnity Program applications, and that would be for livestock death losses sustained in the 2020 calendar year. And then March 15th is the final day for producers to request NAP coverage on any type of spring-planted vegetable or fruit crop that they may be planting if they want coverage on those non-insurable crops.
Well, that's a goodly assortment of things. Todd, we appreciate you reminding us of these. And as always, producers can get more specific answers to their direct questions through their local FSA personnel.
That's right, Eric, and we've talked about this before, but just it never hurts to keep bringing it up. Producers can always reach out through phone or email with their local FSA office if they have additional or specific questions regarding their farms. A couple of other sources of information that are made available is farmers.gov webpage. This webpage contains important information about programs, deadlines, and how to apply for benefits. It also contains blogs where like farmers share their own experiences, farmers and ranchers helping others when they're applying for the different programs.
Farmers.gov, it's a top resource. Todd, thanks for coming by and passing all this along, and we'll look forward to visiting with you again in the future.
Thank you, Eric. It's always a pleasure to be here with you, and on behalf of FSA, we appreciate our producers in rural America, and we're here to assist when we can.
Always appreciate your time. Todd Barrows, over from the Farm Service Agency, state headquarters for Kansas, where he serves as a program specialist there. An overview of several things of importance to you producers regarding your USDA program participation on this latest FSA Coffee Talk here on Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State research and extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Again, thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here. Now, today's agricultural news headlines for you, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, at this time of year, the USDA only puts out reports on Kansas crop progress and condition periodically, largely because only one major cash crop is actively growing. For the week ending this past Sunday, our topsoil moisture in the state was rated at 8% surplus, 49% adequate, and 43% short to very short, while subsoil moisture was at 3% surplus, 52% adequate, and 45% short to very short. The winter wheat crop in the state is rated currently at 46% good to excellent, 37% fair, and 17% poor to very poor. As an added note, the cotton harvest in Kansas remains at 84% complete. It's behind the 97% average for this date. And the next report from the USDA on Kansas crop conditions will be in 3 weeks. While Congress approved another round of aid to U.S. producers via what's expected to be the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program 3 effort, the Congressional Research Service, in a report, at least raises the question as to whether such payments are needed. The report was released back on December 21st, and it raised the issue of whether most producers need another round of relief aid. It noted that most major crop and livestock commodities have seen prices increase substantially since July because of improving market conditions, the exceptions being beef, cattle, and dairy. If current market conditions were to persist into the first half of 2021, it would appear that price declines would be a possible reason for a new round of CFAP payments for livestock and dairy, but not for row crops, according to that report. The Kansas Department of Agriculture's Division of Water Resources has approved the Local Enhanced Management Area, or LEMA, plan for all of the area in Wichita County in west central Kansas, lying within the boundaries of the Western Kansas Groundwater Management District Number 1. This LEMA was signed on December the 30th, and it is effective for a 5-year period beginning this past Friday, January the 1st. The LEMA plan was proposed by the GMD1 Board of Directors in March of last year. It calls for reductions in water use in specified areas of Wichita County in the district. Details in the plan were set to meet the goal of extending the usable life of the Ogallala Aquifer for the long-term benefit of the area by addressing excessive water level declines and withdrawal rates exceeding the recharge rates. The plan was approved by the chief engineer following an extended hearing process. Now, a LEMA is a tool that allows groundwater management districts to set goals and control measures to aid in water conservation at the approval of the chief engineer. The Wichita County LEMA is the third such LEMA in Kansas. It was motivated by local users' desire to conserve water and to ensure continued economic viability in the region. For specific questions about this new Wichita County LEMA, you can contact the Groundwater Management District 1 office. And now it's on to this week's edition of Milk Lines with K-State Dairy Specialist Mike Brook. Mike?
Today I want to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning a forgotten group of animals on our dairy farms during the wintertime. You know, many times our heifers and dry cows might suffer from our lack of attention during the wintertime. We get concerned with a lot of other things, and sometimes it's easy to forget those animals because maybe we don't see them necessarily every day, and maybe they're not on the forefront as we try to get through some of the issues that we have with cold weather on our dairies. So let's think about those dry cows and heifers. Number one, during the cold weather, they're going to need extra energy for the situation with cold stress. So you need to visit with your nutritionist about these things to make sure that these animals actually have what they need during this time of the year. You might watch body condition score. Again, we don't really want to gain or lose a lot of body condition score with these dry cows, and it's a little bit difficult to assess body condition score because of the longer hair coats, but it's still important to do. Keeping in mind that during the wintertime we probably will see an increase in body condition score. That's a natural way that the cow actually is partitioning energy so that she can hopefully withstand more cold stress. And then finally, just making sure that you've supplied it enough energy in that diet to accommodate her changes in metabolism. So as you think about the things that allow the animal to withstand cold stress, For these mature animals and even for heifers that are bred, a clean, dry hair coat is very, very important in helping them have enough insulation to withstand the cold. Making sure that you keep that hair coat dry and clean so that it's not matted is very, very important. So as you think about that, what do you really need to do? Well, if we're having dry weather and we're not having a lot of moisture, then it's pretty easy to keep those hair coats clean and dry. The situation happens when we start to have moisture involved. Temporary housing can be very important during periods of rain or snow that we can get those animals in. Maybe we don't use it all the time, but just during those times that we need it to keep those animals dry. Secondly, if we can't do that, when are you going to bed? A lot of times we put a lot of effort into bedding prior to the storm, and that can be helpful, but the problem is during the storm that bedding becomes wet. Now, after the storm, and particularly as you think about snow events, sometimes it's extremely cold after the event passes. Those animals even need more protection. So if you do bed before the storm, keep in mind that it's also important to bed just right after the storm so that those animals have a dry place to lay and hopefully start to get that hair coat dry if it became wet during the storm. A couple things to consider is water. A lot of times with freezing temperatures, we do have problems with frozen water supplies, and we need to check on our water supplies 2 to 3 times a day to make sure that the waters are working and still not frozen. Another thing a lot of times we don't consider is that animals will actually drink more water if that water is between 40 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit. So if the water is close to freezing, we probably don't get as much water intake. This generally also leads to a decrease in feed intake. Thus, they have less ability to withstand the cold weather that they might be experiencing. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research Extension, making sure that our dairy farms do not forget about their dry cows and heifers during periods of cold stress.
Thanks, Mike. And this is Agriculture Today.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so if you have a fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going in. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
We're back now on Agriculture Today, this time set aside every week to take another look at wildlife management. And aboard once again, former K-State wildlife specialist Charlie Lee. Charlie, you're reporting on yet another study, and this time regarding an important species here in the Central Plains, the prairie chicken, and how weather patterns might impact that upland bird's reproduction. This is a new look at a very important topic, isn't it?
Yes, we know that weather has influenced wildlife populations in many different manners for long periods of time. However, we've not had studies that particularly looked at weather patterns over a length of time, meaning years, perhaps 10 years or more, on grassland bird species. So this was a study conducted by Oklahoma State University, how weather patterns influenced and weather events influenced greater prairie chicken reproduction in the southernmost range of the greater prairie chicken. That would be on the Nature Conservancy's ranch in the northeast corner of Oklahoma, which is about as far south as greater prairie chicken persist throughout the Flint Hills. We know that climate overall, which is nothing more than long-term weather averages in an area, is considered a very important component in habitat for many species. We do know that predictive climate models suggest that many regions across the globe are likely to experience an increase in the range of variables in weather events, primarily increases of temperature or precipitation and an increase in the frequency of extreme weather into the future. This increase in variation in weather patterns can affect wildlife populations several ways, including how they select for habitat and the survival at the individual and also at the population level in many areas. Although extreme weather events by their very nature and perhaps by definition are rare, when they do occur, they can have very important effects on population numbers and the variability of wildlife species, and it can result in mass die-offs associated with something like a long-term heat wave.
Prior to this work that you're reporting on today, has much been known about the prairie chicken's sensitivity, if you will, to weather changes?
There have been some for perhaps 1, 2, or most research trials seldom last longer than 3 years. This is a trial that gathered data over 9 years period. So I would say this is one of the most long-term weather variable studies on grassland birds that's been conducted. It was done on 100,000 acres of tall grass prairie, managed for cattle, same species throughout the Flint Hills. Will be dominated by big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass, and a mixture of forbs. Potential predators were not different there than anywhere else. Those would include coyotes, striped skunks, raccoons, American badger, probably bull snakes as well. The study used walk-in traps to capture greater prairie chicken. Each individual chicken was aged and sexed and then banded with a leg band as well as with one of 2 different types of radio transmitters. And then they followed those chickens throughout their lifespan throughout the study. They monitored 156 prairie chicken nests from 93 different females, and the nest survival varied between years, ranging from a low of 12% nest success in 2019 to 60% nest success in 2014. When you look at that low of success, you realize that maybe there's something going wrong and that it's very difficult for a species to continue to survive, and certainly is going to be very difficult for them to increase when we're looking at a 12% nest success ratio.
So how is the change in weather patterns tied in here then?
Well, they did use computer modeling to look at those weather variables, and the best models showed that daily nest survival decreased with nest age and the time of season since the 1st of April, and in extreme precipitation events, meaning the amount of rainfall in 24 hours. So when you had a wet spring with nests that had been on the ground for a while, not yet brooded, late in the season, we did not have very good nest survival. There was no single variable or time period that completely explained the relationship of weather patterns and greater prairie chicken reproduction. The temperature influenced nest survival, but the effect of temperature really depended upon the amount of precipitation. The nest survival had a negative relationship with daily maximum temperature in years with low precip, and a positive relationship with daily maximum temperature during years with high precipitation. Warmer temperatures before the nest initiation resulted in an earlier incubation start date, but a smaller clutch size. Clutch size and the daily nest survival were most strongly influenced by conditions during the nesting season or just prior to nest initiation. So I'm not sure that there's a lot of things there that managers can really play a role in influencing, but I think overall they show that you've got to manage for nesting cover to ensure population survival. Greater prairie chicken are expected to experience reduced reproduction under increased variable weather patterns. We know we're going to need taller vegetation structure and cooler nest site temperatures, since that's related to prairie chicken nest survival. And we need to manage for patches that have adequate nesting cover, which usually is, in this study, a majority of the nests were found in unburned places within the prairie. So I think that we've got to have that right combination of unburned patches, large structure, and favorable weather conditions in order to expect better than average greater prairie chicken reproductive success.
Well, again, this study was conducted in the southern reaches of the tallgrass prairie in northeastern Oklahoma, and linking prairie chicken nest success to the weather patterns that prevail. Interesting work indeed. Charlie, thanks for sharing it. Charlie Lee, longtime wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension. And with that, our time is away once again. Thanks for tuning in. Please rejoin us right here tomorrow, won't you? Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.